Welcome back, all my Tech-Mexers. Today we got a quick little review, because I watched a quick little movie, and it was called The Matrix Resurrections. And it was okay.
Oh, he's technically Mexican and 3/4 American, but for 3 generations he's got that nationality. Great-great-grandpa headed south, whose kids had kids then turned around. It's not what the show's about, but it's why he's Mexican technically. He helps that he was raised in New Mexico, lived in Guadalajara for 2 years, speaks fluent Spanish with a bachelor's degree in language, and makes a mean taquito.
And I'm joined today by my sweet little baby girl, who I'm distracting with a bottle of pills. Don't worry, guys, it's empty, I think. And it's thematic, because, the red pill and the blue pill. I'm really stretching here, guys. Just lean into it, please, okay? So, The Matrix, Resurrections, which, if I've looked enough on the internet, is either, like, the best movie ever made, or, the worst movie ever made. It's really polarizing, which is weird, because, I thought it was just aggressively mediocre. I didn't think it was a bad movie, because, oh boy, I've seen some bad movies. It definitely was not a great movie. Don't touch the microphone. That's why you have the pills. Seriously, don't buy toys for your kids. They don't need them. They won't play with them. They'll only want to play with the things that you use every day, like your phones, your remotes, and your pill bottles. They won't even end up touching the expensive toys you buy them for Christmas. So, The Matrix Resurrections. From everything I've seen online, there really is no middle ground. Which is strange, because this movie is the middle ground for me. There's a lot of people saying that it completely destroys the franchise. There are people saying that it saves the franchise, and it's really just... It's just a not great movie that exists. So, let's get into it, and obviously, spoilers for the movie and the entire franchise, all the 3 of them. Let's give it some context, though. Matrix, the one, numero uno, is probably one of the greatest movies of all time. It's a perfectly constructed movie. It's a great action movie. It's very suspenseful. It's kind of scary, and oh boy... does it have personality and mood and a central theme that just drives the whole movie forward in a very fun way. And what a unique premise. There were lots of movies of this era that were trying to tackle, like, the internet as a theme. And they're all pretty bad. But The Matrix just perfectly encapsulated that essence of, like, hey, we're all diving into, like, a new era of civilization where things are going to be very different. And the first Matrix movie makes that very scary, in that, like, oh, like, we could go too far and then we won't even know what's real and what's not. And it's great. It's a wonderful movie. And it ends on a great high of, Neo turning into Superman. And it's a lot of fun, and it's great. And it didn't really need sequels. But, it made so much money that they had to make sequels. Now, let's talk about the sequels. They are not fantastic. I really appreciate what they were trying to do and continue the story and continue the world building. They just got caught up in the weeds a lot and kind of forgot what made the first movie so great to begin with. Matrix Resurrection, Matrix Revolutions, Reloaded, shoot, which one's which? You can tell I've seen the first movie a lot more than I've seen the sequels. It Reloaded first, and then Revolutions. Okay, so, Matrix the Dose, Matrix Reloaded, does a lot of things right. It tries to take the first movie and expand it, and have a little bit more fun inside the Matrix and outside the Matrix. It tries to take the story and progress it in the best way that they saw fit. Now, it doesn't always hit its strides. Inside the Matrix, there's some hits and some misses. You've got those ghost twins, which were a pretty cool thing. You got the Maravangian, or what, that guy who's kind of interesting. And you've got Neo showing off his Superman Matrix powers. And basically the first part of the movie, the big old giant mix set piece, the freeway chase scene is absolutely fantastic and shows it really explores the cool parts of the Matrix in a really cool way, and you get some awesome effects with the two semi-trucks colliding into each other and the shockwave effect. It's a really, really great action scene, but it does suffer from Neo being a little bit too powerful. You've basically turned him into a god inside the Matrix, and it's an interesting premise, but what does it do? It lowers the stakes a little bit, in that you're not really afraid for the main character anymore. The first Matrix movie is kind of a spooky jam. It is suspenseful, and you are genuinely scared for the characters' lives. There are lots of characters that die in the first Matrix movie, and you feel the stakes. You feel that people are in danger anytime they step foot in the Matrix because the agents have so much power and are so unstoppable. In Reloaded, Neo can obviously stop them because he's more powerful than they are. It's definitely an interesting narrative place to go, but it does take away from the stakes a little bit. And this definitely makes the movie suffer the further along you get in the story, i.e. when you get to the scene where Neo is fighting a bunch of Agent Smiths at the same time, which was really cool in concept, but I don't think that our technology was all the way there. Some of the CGI in that scene just does not hold up, and the fight scene becomes a little bit cartoony. And again, this movie's biggest flaw is that it loses the weight of the first movie quite substantially as it goes. You get progressively more and more comfortable in this universe and less scared that the characters might die. And they tease you with the death at the very end with Trinity, but then that's immediately retconned with Neo's Jesus powers. And it is a cool moment how he's able to, in the Matrix, reach into her chest and directly change the programming. It's a cool, great concepts, but at the consequence of lowering the stakes just a little bit. Matrix 2, it's a pretty good movie. It's enjoyable. It just doesn't have that magic that the first one had. And it also gets way too tied up in the weeds in the philosophy jargon. They start talking about it way too much. There's too much world building and info dumping going on, and less just fun stuff that the first movie has. You also get more world building outside the Matrix in Zion, and it's interesting. It's cool world building, and just the premise of the machines taking over. It's cool. So Matrix Reloaded it's a pretty good. It's still a good movie. Okay, Matrix The Trace suffers even more, but surprisingly from different problems. The problem with Matrix Revolution is that being inside the Matrix is the most fun part of the Matrix movies, and Matrix Revolution spends the entire movie outside of the Matrix. It's almost exclusively world building in Zion and the machine world, and it's very interesting stuff. It's not super exciting, and consequently doesn't really feel like a Matrix movie until the very, very end with the fight scene with Neo and the world of Agent Smiths, which is a fantastic scene. It's everything the fight scene should have been in the second movie. It's got the stakes again, and it felt a lot less cartoony, with just a bunch of Agent Smiths who've devoured this world, right? And narratively, very, very interesting way to take the story, and I applaud the filmmakers for, not taking the easy route, right? They committed to their decisions from movie 1 and movie 2, and tried to take the story in a natural place where it really would have gone. The problem is, it went to a place that's not as exciting. It was a realistic turn, it just wasn't as fun, right? So you spend the whole movie outside the Matrix, and that's not what's interesting for the Matrix movies. And you get a lot of angsty people in Zion, and you get some really good action sequences with the machines and the big mechs in Zion. It's not a bad movie. It just doesn't really feel like a Matrix movie is the problem. Until the very, very end, where he gets an amazing fight scene with Agent Smith. And what a finale. It really, it suffers almost the entire movie into more and more philosophy and in-world politics, which isn't bad, it's just not as good. But the finale really is fantastic, and it corrects some of the mistakes of Reloaded with bringing the stakes back, in that they're in the real world and they can die, and you get Trinity who dies and Neo who gets blinded, and it's great because it adds. It's a good step because it adds back the stakes that you kind of lost in the second one. It's just not as fun because doesn't take place in the Matrix. So that's the whole thing. The first movie is like a perfect film, and the sequels are fine. They're just not. They just never recaptured that magic. Now let's talk Matrix Resurrections. 20 years after the original Matrix movies, we're doing a sequel. And Matrix Resurrections is just aggressively mediocre at every turn it takes. The first half of The Matrix Resurrections is literally just remaking The Matrix 1 with Neo's story, except it's been rebooted. It just rehashes his story of him getting pulled out of the Matrix for the first time. Except it's different because he knows the story of the 3 Matrix movies, because in this movie he's a game designer, he's a video game designer, and the 3 movies are 3 video games that he made. And so he knows about the Matrix, but he thinks it's fake, even though he based the main character after himself and Trinity on some girl he just sees at the coffee shop every day, which I think was a very interesting way to reboot the franchise. It makes a lot of sense in that if you want to continue the story and keep all the characters and bring them back from the dead, which is a weird choice to begin with, but if you want to do that, I don't think that this was a bad way to try. Cause they're going to remember the events, right? The movie basically goes for gaslighting as its main premise. It's going to say, hey, all of those things that you saw in the first movies, they weren't actually real. They were just a video game that you made, which, in the universe that you've established is kind of on point. Because, the whole premise of the first movie was you don't know if you're living in a simulation or not. And so I think that this was a very good way to take the story narratively, in that, you still don't know if it was a simulation or real life, and not knowing what's real, and that the machine world is trying to gaslight Neo into thinking that this stuff didn't actually happen, thinking that he's crazy and he's going to therapy and taking medication because he can't tell the difference between his video game world and the real world. I think that was actually a great way to take it. The problem with the movie lies in the execution. The action in this movie is really bland. The first action sequence that you get is so choppy and so weirdly filmed that it's just unintelligible, and it keeps calling back to the first movies. It feels like a TV show, like a really low budget TV show in the way that it was filmed, and it's not great. The other problem is the movie is too meta. I liked narratively the decision that they made, but it was executed very poorly in that it was way too self-referential and there was way too many jokes. You really sacrifice the mood of the Matrix to kind of turn it into like a cartoony world of jokes and self-references and, you know, just a very meta narrative, and it removes the stakes. The movie feels silly rather than suspenseful and scary until you get to the halfway point in the film where you finally get out of the Matrix and into the new Zion, which is called Io, right? And the movie really, really suffers from being too self-referential. Like you really just, it's almost a scene-for-scene remake of the first movie. And when you get to the scenes from the first movie, they're playing the scene from the first movie on a screen. And so it's like not even trying to hide that it is a remake of the first one. And you're like, oh, hey, remember this from the first movie? We're doing that part of the story now. Like the characters literally say that. They're like, hey, this happened to you the first time and it was real and we're going to show it to you that this is from your game, but it's real life and we're going to do the exact same scene and we have the chairs set up the same way. And it just doesn't really work. It doesn't, you know, it was an interesting place to take the story. It just wasn't executed very well. And then they get out of the Matrix, and you make your way to the new Zion, which they call IO. And at this point in the movie, it got a lot better for me. There was a lot of interesting world building choices outside of the Matrix, with some of the machines being on the human side, and you get the like nanobot machine AI things. There was some really cool world building going on. Some of the choices the characters make seemed a little silly. The commander just not being on board didn't make a lot of sense. Like, you know, the only goal of the movie turns into, we gotta go save Trinity. And the problem is, it's just not as grandiose as the other movies. Like, it's the goal isn't as steep, right? It's a rescue mission and not so much the world is falling apart and we have to save it mission. So the stakes are lower. And on that note, for some reason, like, not a single person dies in this movie. Like, you know, in the first Matrix movie, you had the crew of the ship just like dying left and right, and you knew that the world you were living in was dangerous. In Matrix Resurrections, like, literally no one dies. And so it feels cartoony again, like the second movie, and you don't feel the weight of the world bearing down on you. The action sequences after he escapes the Matrix, when they go back in, it's literally just a group fight. It felt like the fight scenes in the middle of the street at the end of Batman Dark Knight Rises, where people are just fighting in broad daylight, and it didn't feel like a Batman movie. It's just a big group fighting, and then you get the Meriteravangian guy who's got a big beard, and he's just yelling the whole time, making self-referential jokes, and like the action, it's just not good action. And then he fights the new Agent Smith, who's a new guy, but is the same Agent Smith. And that was like the best action scene in the whole movie, when they like fell to the lower level and were fighting. But it still wasn't that good. It's very messy, and there's a lot of cuts, and just not really well choreographed action, which is one of the highlights of the first movie. Just great action. So then they go in and out of the Matrix, and they try and find the Trinity, and the movie just really kind of falls apart from here. You got my favorite scene of the whole movie was when he's confronted by Neil Patrick Harris's character after meeting Trinity in her like motorcycle shop, and Neil Patrick Harris like freezes time, and Neil Patrick Harris is just having a blast acting in that scene, and you can tell it's a good scene. Him just going off the walls and he's actually a pretty good antagonist in this scene, and freezing time and using bullet time against Neo. This scene was done really well, and this was the first time where like the filming didn't feel like just really terrible. This scene I genuinely liked, that they're taking mechanics and turning them against the character. It was cool. It was imposing. It finally felt like the villain had more power than the main character. And it was a great scene. And then the movie just kind of forgets to make the villain scary like they did in this scene. And the finale is really boring. He goes to save Trinity, and they just let him save her in the Matrix, and they also just let him save her in the real world, which if you've already had an escape, and Neo and Trinity aren't in the regular Matrix, they aren't in like the stacks of humans, they are in a separate building, designed to keep them safe, and you already had one escape. Wouldn't you have guards the second time around constantly monitoring them so they don't escape? But they don't do that. They just let, the humans just show up, and no one's there to stop them from stealing Trinity. And they say, they bring it up. They're saying we're gonna have to do this switch thing. There's a bunch of techno jargon that just is nonsensical. Doesn't make sense. It's just techno jibber jabber to fill airtime. And they say, hey, we're gonna save her. And they say, by the time the machines get there, we'll have already be gone, and they won't even know it. And they say it because it felt like they had a secret hidden up their sleeve, like we were doing this at a different time, and then they realized, or we manipulated something. But there's no explanation for it. It just turns out that the machines are slow. They set it up. It was such a weird scene. They're like, we're gonna go save Trinity, and then they're like, won't the machines know that you're there? And they say yes, but by the time they get the signal, we'll have already been gone. And they cut away because they're before they say why. And it turns out it's because they didn't have an explanation for why they would already be gone. There was no explanation. There was no trick. They just did it fast, except that when it shows them doing it, they're not doing it fast. It doesn't make sense why the machines didn't show up to stop them. And the movie was trying to be clever about it by not telling you they didn't have an answer. That part was really disappointing. They didn't have an answer. And so, the machines in this one just feel incompetent, and they don't feel scary. They just let the good guys just do whatever their plan was. And then the finale, you just get a bunch of motorcycle chasing and a bunch of people falling from buildings. And there was one cool shot where Neo, redirects a missile from one helicopter into another helicopter. Get your finger out of my mouth. There was one cool shot like that, but then the rest of the finale was riding on a motorcycle and him stopping a bunch of bullets. They did the same shot 30 times, and then it ends with Trinity flying instead of Neo, and very disappointing finale. While I was watching it, I was entertained. While I was watching the movie, I was entertained just because I was like, where are they going to take this story? And it's not bad. It's just really not great. And that is the story of this film. Everything about it is mediocre. It's not the worst thing ever. It doesn't destroy the Matrix franchise, but it really isn't great either. It kind of just feels needless. And the whole vibe of the film, it honestly feels like fan fiction. It feels like it was made by different people, which, the original creators, only one of them is involved in this film, and they have changed quite a bit since they made the first movie. And so they kind of are different people. So the film just feels like fan fiction, and it's very cartoony. There are no stakes. Nobody dies. The recasting is not explained well, why Smith is different. And it's just, I do think the movie had a lot of potential. It had a lot of good ideas. It just was not executed very well at all. But in no way does it ruin the franchise. The problem is, I think everyone's just going to completely forget about this film in a month's time, and no one will remember that it existed, because it really isn't special. So that's my take on the entire Matrix franchise and the new movie. It's not bad. It's probably worth seeing. I already know I'm never going to watch it again. I'm not interested in watching it again. I don't regret watching it. but I'm probably going to go and watch Matrix 1 about 30 times now, because it's so good. That's it. That's The Matrix Reloaded. We've been joined today by my wonderful daughter, who is very grumpy right now because she woke up way too early and we're recording this in the morning. So, peace out, all my tech lectures. Please, smash the like button, share the video. I'm really trying to reach 1,000 subscribers so I can get monetized. I got plenty of watch hours, but I need people to subscribe. So please share with your friends, and they can share with, if 3 friends share with their 3 friends, then we'll have a lot of subscribers. So, peace out. Have a great day. I gotta go play with my daughter and get her happy so she's not grumpy anymore. Bye!